Picture this, $50 billion, enough to build 10 international airports, enough to fund a nation's healthcare for a decade. Now imagine taking every dollar and burying it in the sand. That is not a metaphor. That is what Saudi Arabia has done with NEOM. $50 billion spent, and from the air, you can barely see where the money went. Just this week, financial analysts confirmed what has become impossible to deny. $50 billion has been spent on NEOM, and the project is 1.4% complete. 1.4%. That is the return on the largest construction investment in modern history. But here is what Saudi officials are trying to keep buried deeper than those foundations. The $50 billion didn't just vanish into the desert. It vanished into a system designed to hide where it went. In this video, I will expose exactly where $50 billion went and why there is nothing to show for it. Reveal the contractor payments that built nothing, and show you satellite evidence proving the desert is winning, and show you why the biggest construction budget in history has produced the smallest results. Category 1. Site preparation. The line required blasting and excavating a trench through solid rock across the desert. An estimated $5 billion per kilometer for a trench. No walls, no foundations, no structures, just a hole in the ground. For context, the most expensive subway ever built cost $1.7 billion per kilometer. NEOM's trench cost 3 times that. And you can't ride a trench to work. $1.7 billion moves millions of people daily. $5 billion at NEOM moves sand. Category 2. Consulting and management fees. This is where it gets obscene. An estimated $8 billion went to consulting firms, strategy decks, feasibility studies, master plans rewritten every 6 months. One former employee told reporters that NEOM went through 7 complete master plan revisions in 5 years. Each revision cost hundreds of millions. 7 master plans. Before a single building went up, they changed their mind 7 times about what to build. Category 3. Supporting infrastructure, roads, temporary ports, worker camps, power lines, water desalination. Roughly $18 billion went into infrastructure serving the site itself. Roads to nowhere. A temporary port, worker camps. None of this is the city. This is scaffolding. $18 billion in scaffolding. And Category 4. The remaining $12 billion administration, land acquisition, security, and costs that are classified. Classified? $12 billion of public money with no accounting. That alone should be a scandal. Added up, $50 billion spent. 1.4% of the line excavated. 0 buildings standing. In 2017, the Crown Prince told the world NEOM would be ready by 2025. A functioning city, 9 million residents, 0 carbon emissions, 100% renewable energy. The most ambitious urban project ever conceived. By 2019, the first contracts were awarded. International firms flew teams to the site. Billions started flowing, but almost immediately, contractors hit problems nobody had planned for. The rock was harder than geological surveys predicted. Drilling rigs broke down, schedules slipped. Costs escalated before the first wall was poured. Replacement parts had to be shipped from Europe and Asia. Weeks of downtime per breakdown. Millions lost waiting. By 2021, internal reports showed the project was already 18 months behind schedule and 40% over budget. 40% over budget, and they were still in the digging phase. The actual construction hadn't started. Project managers raised alarms. Internal memos warned that the budget was unrealistic. Those memos were buried. One former engineer told the Financial Times that questioning costs was treated as disloyalty. You either supported the vision or you left. 2022 made everything worse. Global steel prices surged. Concrete costs doubled in some markets. Shipping rates tripled. Everything NEOM needed became dramatically more expensive at exactly the moment they needed to buy more of it. Materials sat in staging yards. Contractors waited for revised budgets. Months passed with equipment idle and contracts frozen. The cost of doing nothing was staggering. Idle equipment and standby labor burned through millions every week. By 2023, the scale back began. The line was quietly shrunk from 170 kilometers to 2.4. That is a 98.6% reduction. They didn't trim the project. They erased it. 98.6% gone after $50 billion spent. The finance minister called it a multi-generational development. Multi-generational development. Government, speak for your grandchildren, might see a fraction of what was promised. Now, here is the evidence they cannot hide. Satellite imagery, 2020 versus 2025. 5 years and $50 billion apart. From orbit, you can barely tell the difference. A trench, some roads, a worker camp. A staging area, $50 billion reduced to a scratch in the sand. The total area showing any development activity covers less than 1% of NEOM's planned footprint. The desert doesn't lie. From the air, the trench is nearly indistinguishable from a natural ravine. That is the legacy of the largest construction investment in history. And it is not just the line. Trojena, the ski resort in the desert mountains, was supposed to host the 2029 Asian Winter Games. The games were canceled. The site shows minimal construction, billions allocated, barely a foundation poured. Sindalah, the luxury island resort, was supposed to open in 2024. It didn't. Oxagon, the floating industrial city, exists only as concept renders. No prototype. No proof of concept. No floating anything. Every single sub-project behind schedule. Every single one over budget. Every single one failing to deliver. Here's the question that haunts Riyadh. What does a kingdom do when $50 billion produces almost nothing? The answer is you pivot and you pray nobody calculates the cost of the pivot itself. NEOM is being quietly repositioned as an artificial intelligence and data center hub. The city of the future replaced by server warehouses. But the pivot doesn't erase what was spent. $50 billion in trenches and temporary roads doesn't convert into data centers. They are now spending additional billions to repurpose infrastructure that was built for a city nobody will ever live in. To be fair, data centers are a legitimate business. Global demand for AI computing is real. But you don't need to spend $50 billion on a desert trench. First, a world-class data center hub costs a fraction of what has already been wasted. The pivot doesn't justify the spending. It exposes it. Microsoft built a global data center network for a fraction of this. Google did it for less. No trench required. The comparison is damning. Tech giants built more with less. NEOM built less with more. And the economic pressure is mounting. Oil still provides 60% of Saudi revenue. Diversification hasn't moved the needle. The Public Investment Fund has lost $8 billion on domestic investments. The fund that was supposed to finance the post-oil future is shrinking. One former NEOM executive put it bluntly to the Financial Times, letting him down gently. While $50 billion sits buried in the sand, and the human cost, over 21,000 workers have died or disappeared on Vision 2030 projects, 74% classified as natural causes. Young men dying of heat and exhaustion while building nothing. Natural causes. Governments speak for, we worked them to death and reclassified the paperwork. A systematic pattern, every death reclassified. Every family denied the truth. They left their families to build someone else's dream. And the dream turned out to be a trench. So here is the verdict. $50 billion spent. 1.4% of one project partially excavated. 0 building standing. 0 residents housed. 0 tourists welcomed. A ski resort with no snow. A floating city that doesn't float. This is not a project in progress. This is the most expensive hole in the ground ever dug. They sold the world the greatest construction project in history. They took the money and they built a trench. You deserve better than a multi-generational excuse for a $50 billion failure. Was this incompetence or something worse? Subscribe, because $50 billion is just what we can trace. Wait until you see the classified spending